Hey everyone, welcome back to the Leadership Project with your host Mick Spears. Our vision is to inspire all leaders to challenge the status quo. We bring you weekly topics and thought-provoking guests to get you to stop, reflect, and think about what it means to be a leader in a modern world. Our aim is to help you become the leader you wish you always had, as we learn together and lead together. Please enjoy the show. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Leadership Project. We've got a really special guest for you today. We're honoured to be joined by David Nour, the CEO of Nour Group. Nour is a best-selling author of 11 books, including Relationship Economics, Return on Impact, Co-Create, and his latest offering, Curvebenders. And we're going to spend quite a bit of time talking about Curvebenders in today's episode. Nour prides himself on this vision that non-linear relationships dramatically improve the future of how we work. And I can't imagine a more topical topic to talk about right now with everything that the world has gone through in the last 2 years. The world is changing right there in front of our eyes, and sometimes it's important for us to stop, think and reflect about how we can get back to the basics of things like relationships to make sure that we can make a true and positive impact on the world. So it's a great pleasure to be joined by Nour today, and I look forward to this discussion and sharing it with you. So Nour, please tell us a little bit more about your background and what led you up to this point today talking with us.
It is good to be with you. I am delighted to join you and your audience. My background, originally from Iran, came to the U.S. in 1981 with a suitcase, $100, didn't know anybody, didn't speak a word of English. Parents are retired college professors in Persian literature and Persian history. I've lived and worked in a number of different countries, predominantly Middle East. And you very quickly learn that the rest of the world builds relationships first, from which they do business. Unfortunately, as Americans or even a lot of Western cultures, we're so focused on the business part that if and only if the business part works, then we'll think about building and nurturing relationships. So after several undergraduate studies and graduate school and several years in the corporate world, hard to believe 20 years ago, I embarked on my own firm and work with a lot of global clients on real innovation, lasting change, really accelerating their desired outcomes through their strategic relationships. As you were kind enough to mention, 11 books, I'm working on number 12. And just passionate about this idea of relationships as more than just a soft skill, but really as a strategic asset that that's underutilized, underdeveloped in many individuals, teams, and organizations that we've quantifiably proven can accelerate the outcomes you're after.
Yeah, thanks, Nour. And I want to double down on what you just said. I've seen you in action. I've been researching you and seeing the A-list companies that you've been dealing with and helping people to come to this realization. Also, a very accomplished speaker, wonderful, engaging approach that you have when you have on stage, and it's a great honor to have you on the show. Let's dig
Very kind.
Let's dig into this a little bit further. I've also had the pleasure of working globally. So I live in Singapore now. I've worked a lot in Asia. I'm Australian by background, lived in New Zealand, worked a lot in France, and now work for a US company. So I have seen this difference, right? So when you're dealing in an Asian culture, quite often a European culture, relationships are first. And so when you go out in Asia on a business meeting and you'll have that dinner is really important. And you'll often see that perhaps an American business person will get frustrated and going, well, how come we're not talking about business? Right? It is relationships first. So tell us a little bit more about your experience with that.
Yeah, and again, it's a great deal of myths and misperceptions that in order for me to be efficient, right? I can't imagine, what are we going to talk about at a 4-hour dinner? Well, in other parts of the world, your genealogy, where you grew up, what your parents did for a living, how did you get in this business? And the relationships you've nurtured to succeed are all really part of your brand. They're part of who you are and why they would want to work with you beyond any product or service. And again, particularly as Americans, we're so focused on that efficiency, right? That let's get this project or this initiative done. Let's get this deal done. And if that works, then I'll ask you about your family and what you do for fun and really invest in getting to know the real you, not just the transactional you. And unfortunately, that's the disconnect. The myth or misperception is that I'm here to do business first. And like I said, if that works, then I may ask you about, and nurture a relationship. And it couldn't be further from the truth. And Nick, the other thing that I've found over the years is that a lot of people intellectually understand that relationships are important. Yet very few people quantify the investments they make in relationships. Very few track the progress or the continuum of a relationship from a contact to a colleague to a deep, meaningful, authentic relationship that's value-based. If you think of that, that's a spectrum, if you will. Very few people think about relationships as strategic. And just a data point for your audience, a ton of research shows that an average individual can proactively manage about 100 to 150 relationships. So here's $1 million question. Which ones? And if you believe the notion that relationships are an investment of time, effort, resources, you simply cannot invest in everybody equally. So how will you then prioritize which relationships you're going to invest in? And way too many people are way too myopic that, that person's on my pipeline, or that person is just a internal manager leader I've got to work with, or that person is immediately valuable to me. And they have blinders on to relationships that they're neglecting or relationships that they're not investing in. So all of this is really focused on you becoming, every one of us, becoming more intentional in the relationships we choose to invest in. And on any given day, on every given day, it's an investment. So make those investments wisely and really begin to think of your relationships beyond your education, beyond your professional pedigree. Really begin to think of your relationships as your single biggest and most sustainable differentiator.
That's really good. No, I want to go a bit deeper, and we're going deep quite early. How do you avoid the what's in it for me? So you're talking about investing in relationships. How do you make sure that that relationship is about the other person and not self-centered or has some kind of, I've heard you talk about people have got a BS radar, right? So how do you make sure that it's altruistic, that you're really taking a genuine care in the other person?
Yeah, it make you bring up a great point. In relationship economics, my seminal work and one of the early writings that I've done now I'm completely rewriting the 3rd edition of that book that'll be released next year. I talk about 3 types of relationships, right? First one is your personal. These are friends. These are people that are just like you and me. And maybe you go, fishing, or you go hunting, or you go, they're next door neighbors and friends. They're discretionary because we pick and choose who we want to associate with. We're never sure their relevance in our professional lives. So my next door neighbor, really nice guy, runs a small landscape business. We've been to their home. They've been to ours, but he's not really relevant with the large enterprises that I work with. So that's one type of a relationship. The next group are your functional relationships. These are Let's be honest, they're not discretionary. We may not pick them, maybe some of our colleagues or some of our clients or partners, but they're still safe because of the context of our work together. I may not want to go have a beer with them after work, but I work with them throughout the day functionally to get things done. Most people I meet have plenty of the first two. It's the last one they miss out on, which is really their strategic relationships. And if you've ever met these individuals, they demonstrate very early on in our interaction a vested interest in you and your success without an agenda. They're very authentic. They're very real. They don't want money from you. They don't want favors from you. They genuinely want to see you become the best version of yourself. And I think, to your question, if we all focus on in that early interaction, how can I be an asset? How can I add value to this other person? In essence, how can I give a hand before I have my hand out? That's how you begin to set yourself apart. The other thing you brought up, you were kind enough to bring up, I genuinely believe most everybody has a BS radar. If you're not authentic, if you're not real, if you show up at that coffee meeting or that meal or that next Zoom session with an agenda, they're going to see right through that. And most people are going to disengage, if not going to give you that arm's length treatment. So, and this is not a religious comment by any stretch, but our pastor at our church says, the bigger the gap between who you really are and who you pretend to be, the more exhausting life becomes. Because you always have to put up a front, right? And sooner or later, people will see right through that. So I think particularly this last 18 months, if you think about it, the relationships we spend more time with, it actually hasn't been more, it's been fewer, but it's fewer, more authentic, more real, more genuine, more depth relationships that we've had, because those are the people that know us and hopefully like us and trust us and want to work with us. And I think increasingly we crave that. We crave that authenticity. We crave the real you, not the facade that you think you should put up to try to impress somebody. So being authentic, I would submit, is one of the biggest investments you can make in yourself and in how you show up when you engage, when you try to influence others.
Outstanding. No, I really like this a lot. I'm going to double click again, go deeper again. I've got two questions, but we'll go one at a time. Why do you think it's important to put relationships first for the other person? So that for the person you're engaging, why is it important to them?
Sure. So sociologists tell us that when we meet someone else, we give, the other person takes, they judge, they give back. And it's this natural exchange, right? So if they're not saying it, they're certainly thinking it. What they're thinking, how am I better off because of a relationship with this person? Am I somehow more intelligent? Am I more engaging? Am I more knowledgeable? Am I more, right? Can I accelerate my success or learning or growth or something? There's got to be something in it other than your good looks and charm for that person to want to continue to interact with you, right? So I'm a big believer of, in every interaction, you have two options and two options only. You're either going to enhance your credibility, your repute, your perceived value, or you're going to delineate. You're going to decline some of that value, right? You're going to depreciate some of that value. So if you go into every interaction with how can I add value? How do I ensure, whether it's 5 minutes or 5 hours that I spend with this person, is perceived to be of value by the time we're done? Then think about it. They look forward to hearing from you. They look forward to your next interaction. They look forward to return. They immediately return your call. That was, by the way, one of my litmus tests during this pandemic. Think about it. Most everybody abandoned their offices. How many of your relationships did you have their cell number to get in touch with them? How many of your relationships returned your calls and emails within 24 hours? Because if neither one of those are happening, then I would question the breadth, the depth, the quality, the authenticity, the value exchange in your relationships. And I got to tell you, at the onset of this pandemic, one of the things I did is I made a list of my top 100 business relationships. Clients, prospects, colleagues, thought leaders, and I just started reaching out. And I didn't try to sell them anything, my consulting or advisory, speaking services, whatever. I simply asked, how are you doing? And what are you seeing? And what are you hearing? And what are you struggling with? And how can I help? And I'm not in the PPE business, but if this client is looking for masks and personal protection equipment, and this other client has some extra, I put them together because they remembered how they met and how they were introduced. And at the time of need, kind of Nour is the guy that kind of helped, regardless of the fact that I'm really not in that business. I've counted this over the years. I've helped 182 executives find jobs. And Mick, I'm not a recruiter. I don't get paid to recruit. I've never asked for a fee, but these are relationships. And and this is something your audience needs to hear. Every referral is a recommendation. So if people are not referring you, are they hesitant about recommending you? So if I work with an executive and for whatever reason, they're not a right fit in that job or in that company or in that culture, but I have another client that is looking for someone of their caliber or background or experience, I simply make an introduction. And if they land, most of the good ones remember who helped them or how they were helped. And if you invest, going back to your original question, if you invest in others, it's amazing how often that investment pays dividends in folds. And this is not the reason that I do it, but if I help an executive get introduced to a new client or a new company, they often bring you in to help them with whatever challenges or opportunities they've got going on. And I've been blessed. I haven't had to cold call anybody for business in 10, 15 years.
Mm. We're touching on my second question, which I'll circle back to in a moment. I want to add something and just test this hypothesis with you as well, Nour. So this putting the other person first and looking to add value without any desire for anything immediately in return, I would also say that you're showing that you see them. And every person in the world wants to feel like they matter. And by putting them first in that very first conversation, you are showing them that they matter to you. What's your reflection on that?
Unequivocally, yes. Not only they matter, you honor them, you respect them, you appreciate what they bring. Mick, here's the challenge. I've been talking about relationship givers, takers, and investors for years. Adam Grant, the Wharton professor and corporate psychologist, wrote a book called Givers and Takers and reiterates some of the same ideas. But it really is true. There's some people that altruistically give. They get something very euphoric from just giving. God bless Mother Teresa, right? The problem is most of us can't be pure givers because, Mick, I don't know about you. I've got something called a mortgage, right? So it's just very difficult to just be a pure giver. Unfortunately, there are certain people that are just pure takers, right? The only time they call is when they want something. By the way, let's catch up is a secret phrase for I want something, right? So that's the only time they call. That's the only time they show up is they want something. And we all want to be nice. We don't want to be confrontational. So we don't say anything. And in the process, we enable their behaviors. So they never see themselves as takers. And that's all they do is they just kind of continue to take because nobody says anything. I'm not one of those people. I actually will tell you, I'm sorry. When was the last time you called to see how I'm doing? And when was the last time you called to see how my business is going, right? So givers altruistically give, takers never see themselves as takers, and they always are taking. The astute relationship builders understand that it's an investment. So they invest in relationships, and I actually have a 3-touch rule. 3 times I'll make an investment without asking for anything in return. What I am observing, Mick, are some fundamental laws, irrefutable, fundamental laws in business relationships. Number one is gratitude. Somebody does something for you, at a minimum, you should say thank you. Number two is reciprocity. Maybe not today or tomorrow or next week or next month, but at some point, someone does something for you, you should say thank you. How can I help you? How can I be an asset to you? The third one is this idea of pay it forward. So if I coach you, if I mentor you, if I help you, if I become an asset to you, I need to not just have you say it, I need to observe you doing the same for someone else. If those things don't happen, my kind of relationship yellow flag goes up of, does Mick get it? Does he understand that we're not in the product or service business? We're all fundamentally in the relationship business. And if you don't do those things, the signal you're sending is you don't get it, or you don't care, or that's not really important to you. And none of those are a leadership brand or a professional brand that I want to be associated with.
Brilliant, Nour. If we take nothing else from this episode, and there's going to be many, many more things, but I want the audience to think about those three things that Nour just said. So, gratitude, give it back, and pay it forward. The world will be a better place if all of us lived by those three. So let's get to the second question then, which is about return on impact, if you like. So how do you then draw the benefit? So you've been very giving, and you've set a rule of 3 for yourself, that you give value 3 times before you go anywhere near asking for something in return. Tell us about how it then turns into some kind of multiplication or some kind of benefit backwards.
Yeah, Mick, great question. In my experience, and again, in our research, what we found is most business professionals want to help. Candidly, they don't know how to help. They don't know. And again, it's not their job to pull out of you, what can I do to help you? So we have to become more intentional about asking for help. So in a joking way, I tell people to firm up your ask. Be very specific, be very intentional, be very definitive about what is it that you want help with. So I've always liked one-pagers. And in the pre-pandemic world, and slowly as we kind of come back together, over a cup of coffee, I would typically create a one-page that had and if you think of it in thirds, right? Top third is maybe a little about my bio or a brief description. The second third is maybe where I've created impact for others. The bottom third is, let's just say, for example, I'm looking for new clients or I'm looking for new business. List of specific companies or organizations that I'd like to just learn more about, and maybe the individuals that I'd like to meet, and why. So give them some context. Compare that approach to someone who just says, hey, do you know anybody I could talk to? Yeah, I know a lot of people, but you're not arming me with ammunition intelligently to help you. Because on that one page, and if I put that in front of you or create a PDF and send that to you, look at what that just created. A synopsis of kind of your unique value add. 2, social proof of where you've been successful. Where have you created impact? Where have you created value before? And at the bottom, a very specific set of asks, a very specific set of requests. Because I may not know someone at Peloton or Tesla, but I know somebody else that does. And I'm happy to make that introduction, particularly if you've invested, if you've added value to me. It's the exact same thing when people look for jobs. Well, do you know anybody that's looking for someone? Sure, I know a lot of people, but arm me with the ammunition to be able to intelligently talk about you. When you do that, and again, our research shows when you're specific, when you're quantifiable, when you start by investing in others, there's a definitive and a quantifiable return on your relationship investments. So think of time to cash. Think of reduced cycles to get in the door into a company or into a job opportunity. Think of partnerships that can dramatically elevate or accelerate your go-to-market strategy. Think of access to people who've already innovated in key areas you're struggling with. I mean, I can come up with case study after case study, an example of how the right strategic relationships at the right time can quantifiably accelerate your path to outcomes. It is incumbent upon you to become more specific, more definitive, more intentional in whom, when, and how you ask for help.
There's three really powerful things that I'm taking away, Nour, and I'd like to play them back to you and get your view. So first of all, there's lots of people in the world that want to have a meaningful impact on the world. And guess what? You're a single person. And if you don't have strong connections and networks, you'll only have a certain ripple effect on the world. So if you really want to have true purpose and meaning and create a meaningful impact on the world, you need to build these networks that Nour is talking about and build those relationships so that you can multiply your impact on the world. The three things I'm taking away, Nour, is your description that you've helped 182 executives find their place in the world. There's 182 people already that you've helped that I'm sure are ready to help you when you need them. The second one is you spoke before about referrals being the same thing as a recommendation. I can tell you right now, and I'm already warming to you, Nour, without any doubt whatsoever, but I'm ready to refer and recommend you if you've created value in my life, if I've seen it in action. And if I want to go to Tesla, let's say, and I want to recommend your services to Tesla, I want to go into that relationships going, I'm not just recommending Nour. I know that Nour brings value. Not just I met him once and he's a nice guy. I know he brings value and I know he comes from a great place. And then the third thing, which I had not considered once until this conversation, is about being specific. If someone does want to help you, if you're not specific about how they could help you, they're shooting in the dark. They want to help you. They just don't know how. That was really powerful. That's a big takeaway from me today. I'd like to now bounce off that then. And I want to use the term that I've heard you say. You talk about non-linear relationships dramatically improve the future of work. What do you mean by non-linear?
Sure. So in the most recent book, Curvebenders, Mick, I started, as I do most books, really thinking about a single question, which is, in the next decade, given this global pandemic, given disruptions like technology, like geopolitics, like supply chain, and haves versus have-nots, so all of these potential disruptions, Mick, how will I remain relevant in what I do and how I do it? And we embarked on a longitudinal research, and the entire second chapter of Curvebenders is focused on 15 forces we've identified that are going to continue to disrupt the way we work, the way we play, the way we live, the way we give to others. And my assertion is to remain relevant in some of this headwind, some of which could be tailwind, and some that could be just turbulence. You're going to have to accelerate your learning and growth in this journey that I call your journey from now to next. So what is that next best version of you? What is that next chapter in your personal and professional growth looks like? And for most of us, and for most of our lives to date, it has been this linear curve. So think of a 45-degree truck ramp that we learn. Maybe at some future point, we'll apply it. And a good example of it could be our undergraduate degrees, right? I don't know when was the last time you looked back into differential calculus. It's been some time for me, right? But it was a course we took and a grade we pursued, right? Well, in face of constant disruption, I don't believe that linear growth will no longer suffice. What you really need is this nonlinear growth that looks more like a hockey stick. And to give you an example, your audience and examples, I don't need a 4-year degree from MIT. I just want to learn how to code to solve a very specific problem. Well, it turns out I can learn the basics of it in about 30 days. And by the way, for free. And I can solve that problem. Then I can tie that to the next learning and the next problem I solve. And as I daisy chain these learnings together, now I really do create that hockey stick growth. And in that process, what we found is a few, but really strategic relationships, which is the third type of relationship. I mentioned earlier, personal and functional. Strategic is the third type that really elevate your thinking, that elevate your perspective, that push you beyond even your own perceived limitations to new heights. Those few relationships accelerate your journey in that nonlinear growth. And I call those relationships curvebenders. Said another way, someone who's already figured out that which you're struggling with will dramatically shorten your learning curve and accelerate your path to where you're trying to get to. Those relationships I call curvebenders.
I love it, Nour. And it's so great watching you here on the Zoom, hearing you through the audio, bringing your book to life, because I've been reading your book this week and I've just thoroughly enjoyed it. But hearing that description, that path that you just took us on, talking about what you describe as accelerated relevance and having those strategic relationships to help you go up that curve and bend the curve and accelerate your learning. I really love it. And your reflection on a 4-year degree being very different to what maybe is effective in the world. So I really want to unpack that a little bit further, if you like.
Sure.
You speak about micro-learning. Tell us why micro-learning is important.
Yeah. So I've as long as I can remember, I've had an insatiable appetite, Mick, to learn, to grow, to experience new experiences, and as a friend, Erica Anderson talks about in her book, willing to be bad at something, to learn and grow. That's as long as I can remember has been my mindset. The challenge with traditional learning and development, like I said, is number one, often very sequential. Learn this, then this, then this, then this. Number two, it is intellectual food. I have no idea when or how I'll use those negotiation skills or that, project management skill or those sales skills. But like food, we intellectually consume this, hopefully store it somewhere, and again, at some point in the future, may or may not apply it. What I've learned is if you break that learning into smaller, much more concise, much more precise, much more practical, pragmatic, hands-on, learn something, then immediately apply it. So these micro-learning, what I call micro-learning opportunities, not only they stay with us, and again, the Association for Learning and Development talks about if you don't apply what you've learned within 30 days, something like 86% of it is forgotten. It just, right? We get distracted and pulled in a lot of different directions, and we kind of and what I regret is that we shove that folder on a shelf or we shove that paperwork in a binder and we just forget about it. Versus, how do I quickly learn something and apply it? So, a quick fun story for you and your audience. We do something called a learning expedition, where we take a group of leaders out of their office, out of their element, and we intentionally infuse them in a challenging environment, and that's where they learn and grow. So imagine a backpacking trip, or so this last week I went on a fly fishing trip, and Mick, full disclosure, never been fly fishing, didn't know anything about it, didn't have any of the equipment, but I had a fabulous guide, and I learned what a fly is and how a line works and how to assemble the rod and how to cast, which is an art and a science. And you know what? By end of the second day, my targeting is getting pretty good. And catching a fish is just an added bonus, but the serenity of that river and just the peacefulness was just unbelievable and something I'd never experienced before. But unless you're willing to be bad at something, unless you're willing to learn something, I don't need to go to a 6-month flight. I don't want to tie my own flies yet. I don't want to go to a 6-month school or read 5,000 pages on fly fishing. I love being outdoors. So let me go experience it, create a micro learning opportunity for me. Let me get value from that and then choose to continue to invest in it. And that's how I believe we'll remain relevant. We'll learn more. We'll learn it more quickly. And more importantly, apply that learning to improve our lives, not just kind of store it somewhere where it's forgotten or it becomes complacent or really doesn't add value to our journey.
Wonderful. And it's so true. I mean, learning and knowledge is meaningless unless it's put into application, and you will forget it. Glass's pyramid tells us all of these things, right? You remember 10% of what you read and 20% of what you hear and 30% of what someone talks through with you and 50% of what you see and hear. But you remember 70% of what you experience for yourself, 80% of what you talk about with other people, and 95% of what you teach to someone else, right? So the fly fishing was just a brilliant story there, Nour. I'm going to remember that because I could read every book in the world on fly fishing for 4 years. I could YouTube it, but unless I hold that rod in my hand, I still don't know how to fly fish. And give a short period of time, I'll forget everything I read anyway. So yeah, just wonderful. I love this. The other thing I want to test on with microlearning, what are your thoughts on the property of emergence? So by learning things like, okay, let's learn and apply, then learn something else and apply. What about the property of emergence that comes?
Yeah, I got to tell you, I learn an enormous amount from my kids. And for you or your audience members, anybody who has a kid, they ask you a question, and it's very easy for us as parents to just give them the answer. What the other fun fact we learned about particularly micro learning is that struggle, the struggle to seek, the struggle for the aha moments, the struggle to emerge with a solution, something that you hadn't previously thought of as a possibility, as potential, Mick, has enormous impact. That aha moment, that euphoric aha moment that I get it, I like it, I've internalized it. I may still not have the answer, but I certainly have a path that I want to pursue, becomes invaluable. And regrettably, particularly in our organizations, I believe we still spoon feed a lot of people. We spoon feed a lot of talent. And I would submit, if we allow them to scrape their knees, if we create a culture unafraid of retribution, if we create a culture that immerses itself in experimentation and exploration and iteration, it's amazing how often we'll have a chance to stumble on innovation, if not disruption. So the learning we get excited about is where they do struggle a bit. And instead of giving anybody the answers, they really come up with a path. They come up with a approach. They come up with an aha moment that they may have not have thought of before themselves. And that process really helps them grow and embrace a new approach to solving that problem. And by the way, it works as effectively in communication as it does decision-making, as it does problem solving, as it does surrounding themselves with talent who may think very differently. We often talk about diversity in terms of ethnic and gender, and those are critical. Mick, we're not talking enough about cognitive diversity.
Yeah, brilliant.
We don't surround ourselves with enough people who think very differently than we do. And they're going to look at that exact same scenario very differently than we do. And I think those are just examples of, if you want to continue to learn and grow and remain relevant, that emergent learning and growth and through these micro learning opportunities are going to be critical.
I want to build on that diversity of thought element there. And diversity and inclusion are two topics that are often thrown together, but they're two different things. And diversity for me is all about diversity of thought and keeping an open mind to other people's perspectives. They might be looking at the identical problem to you, but they're looking at it through a different lens, and they will see something that you did not see, right? So diversity of thought, 100%. And inclusion is really important as well. It's about making people feel included and not excluded, and having that environment. On this diversity of thought, here's a thought I'd like to throw there and see your reaction. And I'm going to talk about the curve again and bending the curve. What role do you think unlearning can play in the curve? So not just
it's critical,
but unlearning.
Yeah, it's critical. And I got to tell you, I'm both collector of and share of stories. So several years ago, my wife and kids bought me a scooter for Father's Day. And Mick, I've become passionate about all things motorcycles, and not just throwing my leg over a motorcycle and riding, but I've been to 14 different schools in the decade or so that I've been riding. I've bought and sold 22 different motorcycles. And I've just immersed myself in I rode 10 days in Tuscany. I've ridden the entire Route 66 in the US from Chicago to Santa Monica Pier. Before the pandemic, I was headed for Patagonia to ride for 2 weeks in Argentina. So I've become really passionate about the sport. And one school in particular that I've been to, regardless of how long you've been riding, whether you've been riding, they don't take brand new riders, but if you've been riding 2 years or been riding 20 years, everybody starts at level 1. And making level 1, they teach you 5 skills. And 20 minutes on a track, 20 minutes in a classroom, 20 minutes rest on the hour, every hour. And you do well on day 1, you come back, and day 2, you're on level 2, and level 3, and then level 4, you get to work on what you want to work on. The consistent comment out of level 1, particularly for those who've been riding for some time, is, oh my God, I just figured out that I've been riding motorcycles wrong for 20 years.
Wow. Okay.
And if you're not willing to let go of what you think is the right way of doing something, you're never going to create an opportunity to learn new. So another analogy I like to use with leaders is, that shirt that you bought in 1972 that's still in your closet that you haven't worn for a few decades? If you take that one out and you donate that one, I promise you'll make more room for new, more trendier shirts that are probably going to fit you a little bit better. And that's exactly what we have to embrace with this idea of unlearning. So just because you've done it a certain way doesn't mean it's the only way or often the best way of doing something. And only when you're open to, I'm going to unlearn so I can relearn that approach, that problem solving, that technique, that skill, that knowledge. That's how we learn. That's our evolutionary differentiation as a species, is our ability, our brain's ability to flex, our brain's ability to let go of some things so we can make room for new things.
Just brilliant, Nour. I love every moment of what you've said there. And that's what it's about. It's about surrounding yourself with people with diverse viewpoints, but having that willingness to let go of what you think you already know and keep an open mind to new possibilities. And that's where you can unlearn, give yourself the space to learn something new. All right, back to the definition of curvebender and the relationships. So do you have a pure definition of what a curvebender looks like?
These are strategic relationships that shape both the direction and ultimate destination in our lives. And Mick, if we look back 10, 20 plus years, they leave an indelible imprint on not just what we accomplish, but who we become. So the examples often used is, think of that early college professor who really led you down your academic kind of journey, or that early boss that took you under his or her wings and didn't just teach you a product or service. They taught you how to be an empathetic leader. They taught you how to be a servant leader. You made a commitment, even back then in the spring of your career, that when you were fortunate enough to lead others, you would lead them in the manner in which you were led. Those are the individuals that I call Curvebenders, and they genuinely shape us, shape the manager, the leader, the human being that we become. And we remember them decades later. We're grateful to the impact they created in our lives. And I got to tell you, in writing this book, very early on, one of my own Curvebenders, one of my former CEOs, we were having sushi in Park City. I distinctly remember it. And over dinner, and Bruce is often this way, he asked me a profound question. He said, Nour, it sounds like in this book, you're going to give people a roadmap on how to potentially find Curvebenders in their lives. Probably a more compelling question might be, how do we all become Curvebenders in lives of others? How do we take that 20-some-year-old? How do we take that 30-something-year-old who's got amazing ingredients in him, in her? And the other attribute that I found out about in our research about Curvebenders is they tend to see the best version of us. They tend to see the ingredients. They tend to believe in us when we may not believe in ourselves. And they lead us down this path where we begin to realize our full potential, when we begin to see that which is possible in our growth journey. And funny enough, we actually fight them early on. Our stubbornness, our way of no, he can't be that right, or she can't be right about that. And we kind of continue down our own path. And then we have one of those V8 moments like, oh my gosh, I would have to be dumb as a brick not to listen to what she's saying, or not to listen to the counsel or the advice that he's providing. And we actually course correct and come back and listen to them. And we're forever grateful for whatever angel brought them in our lives, because that's what I haven't figured out yet. Is it all just serendipitous, or can we be? I believe we can be more intentional about identifying and really attracting these really invaluable relationships in our lives.
I love the word picture that you're describing, and I'm instantly here reflecting on who my Curvebenders are, and I do know who they are. Maybe we'll talk about that later, but I'm instantly thinking about who my Curvebenders are. You do have me thinking of two things. I'll start with the first one. I've heard you talk about this quite humorously, actually, about people when they hear about the concept of Curvebender, the first thing they're going to say is, oh, I need these in my life. Where are they? I want one tomorrow. David or Nour, can you please introduce me to a Curvebender, please? It's like, what's your reflection on that?
Yeah. I somehow when you describe it, people think it's this magical, mystical creature that I've got in my back pocket, and I can say, sure, here you go, no problem. It is. There are in a specific section of the book, I've identified 7 steps, but I'm very careful to point them out, as I've always believed. None of us have a crystal ball. None of us can predict the future. If I could, I'd be on the next flight to Las Vegas. We can all plan, and if you're intentional, the way I started that conversation about the relationships you choose to invest in. I've identified 7 steps to meeting potential Curvebenders. But it is, and Mick, I got to tell you, unfortunately, I meet a lot of people who are unwilling. It's not that they're not capable. They're unwilling to do the incredibly difficult work necessary to become world-class, to build a world-class portfolio of relationships, to build few strategic relationships that will pay dividends in folds over their lifetime. And they're looking for that, in the movie Matrix vernacular, they're looking for that blue or red pill. And there isn't one. I haven't found one yet. What I do know is if you do the right things, the results you're after will come. If you think of world-class athletes, I'm specifically reminded of the late Kobe Bryant, the basketball great. And he talked about getting up at 3 a.m. and practicing 4 to 6 a.m. and then having breakfast, and then going out again 8 to 10, taking a break, going out again 12 to 2, taking a break, going out again from 4 to 6. And it's not just one day, it's day after day after day. And as years progress, you're so much better, so much stronger, so much more competent, more capable than your peers, that it truly sets you apart to a different level. And most people are not willing to do that. And relationships are no different. They want the end result of what a curve bender could create in their lives, but they're not willing to invest in themselves and in this portfolio of relationships to help them get there.
Yeah, interesting reflection there, Nour. I want to build on that and talk about the intentionality that you spoke about. We do on this show talk a lot about people finding their own purpose and meaning in the world. And then once you understand that, and people can listen to the previous episodes about, people like Zach Mercurio really talking clearly about how to find that, Lee Prosenjack and Gary Williams really giving some great advice on how to find your own purpose and meaning, and then living with that intention, Nour, that you're talking about. So invest and be intentional in what you do. What I'd like to throw to you and test, because we're in your deep area of expertise here. What of the theory that those curve benders are already in your life? You're just not paying attention, and you're not investing in that relation deeply enough for it to pay off. Thoughts?
Yeah, we actually found definitive data that also to be the case. It is unfortunately our busyness that keeps us from really seeing the insightful, the incredibly valuable relationships that are buried in all the transactions we try to do. So again, I told you I'm a collector and I love to share stories. I've got a client, Mick, who's hired me in 4 different jobs. Now, I keep giving him grief, like, why can't you keep a job? But he's been more than kind, and we've built a decade and a half, almost 2-decade relationship. And as he goes to these different, very large organizations, and now he's a global executive running about a $12, $15 billion business. And as he goes to different companies, he sees very similar challenges, and he kind of brings me in. And ever since I've met him, he's introduced me as the relationship economics guy. And I go in and I see his scenario, and he says, yep, just like the last place, here's what we're struggling with. Can you kind of help me with the same thing we did? And you don't want to say it's cookie cutter, but it's kind of rinse and repeat. And you've got very similar challenges. And he's been invaluable in not just my own business, but a chance to see a very similar set of challenges in very different types of environments. And I've written about him and his work and his companies in various books. And we were talking, and at the moment he's over in Asia, and he called me late one night just looking for some help and insights. And by the way, his daughter goes to the same university my daughter goes to, when they're close, and we've checked up on her. And anytime he comes stateside, we visit. He's been to my home, I've been to his. And so it's more than just a transactional. It's truly become a transformational relationship. And I would submit those individuals are in many of our lives. We just don't pay attention. Exactly as you said, we don't pay attention to the transformative impact in our lives because we're so busy with the transactional. Right. We're so busy with that project or the next deal or the next initiative. And you don't see that this is a relationship more than a reason. You put several reasons together and you get a season. This is truly a relationship for a lifetime. And those lifetime relationships, as I said earlier, are more than just a transaction. They truly have a transformative impact in our lives. And they become curve benders. They become, in their own unique way, they shape our journey and our destination. And we're forever grateful for their impact in our lives.
And we're coming back right there to gratitude again, which is really important. So let's now talk about, we've spoken about gratitude, we've spoken about give it back. What about pay it forward? So let's talk about people in our audience that are listening to this and going, I want to be a curve bender for someone else?
Yeah. I'm reminded of a quote someone else shared with me, which is, age is a terrible price to pay for wisdom. And the first time I grew some facial hair was all black, and being from the Middle East, you look very scary. And more recently, I've noticed there's a lot more salt than there used to be pepper here. So my point is, we all have young people in our lives. We all come across those. If you're particularly, this is true any point in your life, but particularly if you're in the fall or the winter of your career, I would encourage you to get more proactive, get more intentional in identifying those who are in the spring of their careers. And as I said earlier, whether it's a formal mentorship or an informal one, whether it's formal coaching or an informal one, but find those who are willing, and Mick, that is my litmus test. If they're willing to learn and grow and have their assumptions and their assertions challenged, and they're willing to listen and explore different paths, find those that are willing and invest a little in them. See if they actually are willing to listen. They're capable of listening. They may not agree. They may not like your counsel or advice, and implement some of those ideas. And are they learning and growing through that process? And if so, then give a little bit more. But they can learn products and services anywhere. Go back to the fundamentals of what it takes to be a human being. Go back to the fundamentals of what it takes to lead when you're in the midst of chaos and you're in the midst of really difficult situations. Go back and share the wisdom that others shared with you and invested in you. And I think you'll find a few who might just surprise you. And again, I've got several stories. 2013, a very young gentleman from Turkey came and worked with me for the summer, and I didn't have a reason, but I typically do this. I bring young people in as co-ops or interns or summer associates to kind of work with us, and I don't ask them to fetch coffee. They actually work on client engagements, and I challenge them to think, and they come to my home and meet my family and have dinners with us, and we kind of show them how we live, not just how we work. And I was recently in Istanbul, and several times we traveled there. Mom and dad kind of meet me there, and we looked him up and his parents, and we've had dinners, and now his fiance, and unfortunately, this past trip, both of my elderly parents caught COVID. Oh. And as you can imagine, catching COVID is tough. Catching COVID in a foreign country where you don't speak the language, you don't know anybody, you don't have access to your home resources, just adds an incredible layer of complexity. Well, Tug not only has been, and we're still going through this process, has been incredibly valuable. I mean, he helped me. We were quarantined in our hotel. He helped me set up a DoorDash-like service for food and supplies and medicine from local pharmacies, and playing translator between doctors and emergency rooms and the hotel. And I got to tell you, this whole ordeal that lasted and is still ongoing, but a month plus, would have been dramatically more painful if it wasn't for Tug. And again, this was a 20-some-year-old that worked with me close to a decade ago. But that's why I said, if you take a few of these young people under your wings and teach them compassion, teach them servant leadership, teach them empathy, teach them how to listen louder. As I said, they might just completely surprise you in how they show up and in how they go and lead incredible lives. That just refills your cup, because now you see that investment hopefully created a different path or a different growth journey for someone else.
Thanks, Nour. That was just beautiful, and thank you for that story. And the first thing I want to say is I hope that your parents are okay, and that wish them a speedy recovery.
Very kind.
And the second thing to say, isn't it wonderful that you had that person there that could be that resource that could help you get through that, and it's paying back from the investment that you've made in them. What I'd like to add, and I've heard you talk about this in some degree as well, you may also need to be patient. So you said before about willingness. You also said very early in our conversation about eventually the person gets hit by the 4x2 or the brick, and they have this realization later, that's what Nour was talking about when he was trying to teach me about blah, blah, blah. So they may not be willing today. They may need to go through a bit of a journey of discovery for them to get to the point of willingness to open up. And the statement I've heard you've spoken about before, you may have to let them scrape their knee first. Would you like to expand on that?
Yeah, I'm going to go back to my kids. And for any of your listeners who have kids, it's very easy for us as parents to tell our kids, don't do that, right? Just you kind of know, you've seen this movie, you know what the outcome is, and it probably isn't going to go well for them. So we could absolutely tell them, don't do that. And particularly as they become teenagers, Mick, this has been scientifically proven that it goes in one ear and comes right out the other. It just does not kind of sink in the middle. So as long as they don't maim themselves, as long as they don't permanently ruin their lives, I'm actually okay with both my kids, but also some of our colleagues and some of those people that you do try to coach or mentor or support in the spring, hopefully in the spring of their careers. So yeah, scraping their knees. And you know what? If you've never been fired, if you've never been laid off, if you've never made a mistake, I would question whether you're human, but that's beside the point. It's what you learn from those setbacks. And I think most people will tell you that they've learned as much when things haven't gone well in their personal, professional lives, because that's when we get creative. That's when we get scrappy. That's when, you hate to say it, but that's when we realize, oh my gosh, there's some relationships that I have that could potentially help me out of this apparent abyss.
Yeah.
And once we recover, then it hits us. Then we realize, yeah, that counsel years ago was invaluable. So if I may share a quick story with your audience, in my coaching of executives, one of the things that I've observed, and you probably have seen the same, the best leaders feel. And a good friend, Peter Bregman, has written this book called Leading with Emotional Courage. And I love his quote that he says, if you don't allow yourself to feel everything, soon you're not going to feel anything. So you have to let yourself feel anger. You have to let yourself feel frustrated. You have to let yourself feel disappointed. The key is that professional maturity, that emotional intelligence to separate your emotions from your decision-making.
Yeah.
So what I coach a lot of leaders to think about is don't become permanently stupid because you're temporarily upset. Don't say things. Don't do things. Don't send that email. Don't call somebody out because you're upset. It's okay to feel upset, but you know what? Go for a walk. Send that email to yourself. Right? If you're hell bent on sending an email, send that email to yourself, but disconnect that emotion from your actions, from what you say, from how you show up, because you're going to jump down somebody's throat. You're going to call somebody out that had nothing to do with what you're frustrated at or what you're upset about. And that's just one sign of that growth, of that journey, of that maturity, of that coaching and mentoring that regrettably some people don't pick up. You talked about patience till in the summer or maybe even the fall of their careers. But ideal if you can help them see that path early on. Or they do fail a couple of times. They do get fired because they have sharp elbows or they're abrasive. They could be brilliant, but nobody's going to see that brilliant if they're abrasive.
Yeah.
And if they soften that approach up a little bit with some coaching, with some mentoring, it's amazing the paths they create for themselves. And Next thing you know, they've become senior vice president of a division or a P&L leader somewhere else because they were able to make those adjustments, which goes back to something you brought up earlier. They're willing to unlearn what they do and how they've always done it to learn a new path, to learn a new approach to that challenge or that opportunity.
Just brilliant, Nour. I've got to tell you, listening to your description about emails, I don't know how many emails I've written that have ended up in the trash can without ever the send button getting hit. This can be very, you've got to be careful. Make sure you don't hit that send button. But writing an email and then stopping and breathing and then deleting it and starting again can actually be quite helpful. And there's a big difference between reaction and response, right? And an emotionally intelligent person responds, doesn't react. They know their emotional triggers, but they respond in an appropriate way and they control that element. So yeah, that was a wonderful story.
Yeah, and I got to tell you again, I'm a big believer that we're all products of the advice we take. Mm. And an advice a mentor shared with me years ago was, if you lose your composure, if you lose your temper, everyone loses. No one loses more than you. So the calm, and I'm in awe of these people. Mick, the ducks, right? The people that are calm, cool, collected, above water, doesn't look like anything bothers them. I'm in love with these people, men or women, right? Doesn't matter. But underwater, they're struggling like the rest of us are. They've just figured out how to exist. You mentioned respond, not react, how to not let them kind of lose their composure and focus on where they're going and how they're going to get there and how to engage and influence others in a professional manner, even when they are upset or frustrated or angry or disappointed or let down or whatever the case may be. So that's definitively one of those curve bending opportunities for all of us. Good. Is to bring that bring that spring in their career stage person and just pull them aside and have that candid conversation of, listen, as I said earlier, you're brilliant. You're very good at what you do. But as long as you keep burning those bridges, you're never going to get a chance to really demonstrate all that you're capable of.
A couple of things I'd like to bounce off there is, in that reactionary mode, is just to think about the following question. When you are seeing yourself reactionary, just ask yourself the question, how is this serving you? What good can come from it? All right. Whereas if you take a response, you can think about, well, how can this serve me and how can it serve the others around me? Coming back to the patience, the other thing I'd like to say, get your view on, if you see someone that you really believe in, invest in them, be patient with them. They may have to scrape their knee along their way. Once they have scraped their knee and they do come back to you and they say something like, oh, Nour, I really should have listened. You were right. Yeah. The only thing I'd say to people is just be thankful for that at that point, and you don't have to say, I told you so. What are your thoughts on that?
That's exactly right. And again, I think of my daughter, who is a second-year chemistry major at Georgia Tech, and she's on the pre-med track. And as long as I can remember, she's been so hard on herself. And one of the things that I learned early on is if she does have a bad grade or she missteps or something happens, I don't need to reinforce it. I don't need to, just keep driving how badly she screwed up or whatever happened. It's to be there. And more importantly, as you alluded, be the cheerleader, be that counselor, be that sounding board, be that, as you said, delight. I'm glad you figured it out. Now we know what we need to do differently. Let's just, chalk one up for learning and move on to the next one. Well, and we also have to make, I'm a big believer, particularly in our organizations, we have to stop demonizing failure. We have to stop demonizing setbacks. I've often thought, where success comes from? Good ideas, good experiences, good implementation, good decisions. You know where a lot of those come from? bad experiences and bad decisions and missteps and all that didn't go well that hopefully we learn from, that we apply differently the next time. So, and by the way, if you're launching the SpaceX or if you're my surgeon, by all means, please get it right. But for most of us, nobody's dying on our shifts. Yeah. For most of us, nobody's lives are in danger, right? So it's okay. And I've learned this in riding motorcycles, right? You think motorcycles, and inevitably everybody says, oh my God, that's so dangerous. You could fall. Well, newsflash, falling is part of the learning. And it's not a matter of if, it's when. But the 4 times that I've fallen, I know, and by the way, they were all user error. I know exactly what I did. I certainly haven't create safety measures. You create, I go to additional training, additional courses. I've actually been to one school that teaches you how to fall, how to actually fall. So you minimize the potential, problems and challenges. And by the way, I wear all the gear all the time. My gloves have titanium knuckles. You buy gear that has large abrasion, patches and endurance. And so the point is, you apply those failures, you apply those setbacks to improve your condition, to improve your learning, your growth. And it has to happen in our organizations. We have to create margin in terms of time, in terms of budget, in terms of resources, in terms of coaching and mentoring, to allow people to have setbacks and recover from those. Because in my experience, in our research, we're dramatically stronger. By the way, the relationship is also stronger if you go through a setback, because now you see the resilience. Now you see the resolve in recovering from those setbacks. And the person is stronger in your mind and in your heart.
Oh, absolutely. And also they will be gracious for you that you were there when they needed you, right? So yeah, that's a wonderful way to probably bring us to a conclusion, Nour. I'd like everyone to think about everything that Nour's just been saying about failure and about learning and about being there for people when they go through those experiences. You do it yourself, be there for someone when they're going through it as well. So I'd like to bring us now to our crescendo, and we go into our rapid round of questions. You are a prolific author, bestseller, 11 books. So we ask this question to all our audience, but I'm dying to know for you, Nour, what is your favorite book?
I have to tell you, it is one that I deeply believe in, which is it is very difficult to teach others how to think, and we don't make enough time to think. So in my particular world, a book, the title of it is called The Lords of Strategy. And it was really a historical view of how strategy firms like McKinsey and Bain and BCG came about, and their impact on how leaders and organizations kind of continue to think. So that one had a real big impact on me. Another one very quickly, more recently, a friend, a colleague, a woman named Amy Edmondson at Harvard Business School has written a book called Fearless Organizations. And she talks a lot about psychological safety. She was just recently ranked by Thinkers 50 as the top management thinker in the world. And it's another one that I would highly recommend to you and your audience. Again, Fearless Organizations is another great book.
Excellent. All right, 2 great suggestions there, Nour, and we'll mention those in the show notes. Also, of course, your books as well. Next question. What's your favorite quote?
My favorite quote is probably by A.G. Lafley, the former P&G CEO and chairman, and he describes strategy as the best possible choices for best possible outcomes. And that's something that I've incorporated into a lot of our work and a lot of my work with global clients. And it goes, by the way, that's also very relevant to your relationships. What are the best possible choices you can make for the best possible relationship outcomes? And do not be penny wise and pound foolish. Do not be so short-sighted that you do something at the risk of damaging that relationship. And that quote has stayed with me for a number of years.
Yeah, very, very nice. I like this one a lot. And finally, I'm sure many people in our audience are going to want to know more. So how do they get in contact with you, Nour, if they'd like to look at your services or read your books? How do they get in contact with you?
Very kind of you to ask. Obviously, our website, which is just Nour Group, nourgroup.com. But more specifically, I don't know about you, in recent year or so, I found the public social networks to become highly politicized, highly polarizing, and highly promotional. So we've actually created, and I actually belong to several of these myself, these micro communities. So ours, if you go to nourgroup.com/forum, nourgroup.com/forum, we've created a private community. And as you can imagine, appreciate, it's everything that I believe in, which is focus on fewer, but like-minded professionals and relationships that you want to invest in, and they'll invest back. And it's free to join. It is a private community, so want to make sure that you're there for the right reasons. There's no spamming, there's no soliciting of services and stuff, but come and talk about relationships, come and talk about innovation, come and talk about real and lasting change. There's about 2,500 of folks there already, and and I'm there every day sharing ideas and perspectives, and I would encourage you and your listeners, come join us in, again, Nour Group, nourgroup.com/forum.
Wonderful. And I'm going to join myself. That sounds wonderful, Nour. And what a great environment for people to build their relationships and learn from each other. Thank you so much for setting that up. That's just brilliant. And we will put the details of that in the show notes. I'd just like to conclude by thanking you. This has been a great honor, Nour. Just listening to you, I've learnt so much from today's session. Just watching you, listening to you, the power of your storytelling, the power of listening about these relationships and investing in those relationships, giving value first before you expect anything in return, and really then paying back when someone provides you value and paying it forward. So look for Curvebenders. They're in your life already. Look for them, invest in those relationships. Look to become a Curvebender for someone else, and the world will be a better place. So thank you so much, Nour. This has been a great pleasure.
Mick, delightful to be with you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Leadership Project podcast at mickspears.com. I'm your host, Mick Spears. Sound design and editing by Faris Sadek. Social media by Gerald Calabo. And special thanks to our operations manager, Say Spears. We appreciate you, and we appreciate your time today. You can catch the video podcast and our series of shorter videos by subscribing to the Leadership Project YouTube channel. And you can join the conversation at our Facebook community group. We look forward to bringing you another great interview next week as we learn together and lead together. In the meantime, please do take care, look out for each other, and always remember to challenge the status quo.